Rebel, August 1945. The rain had turned the parade ground into a mirror of brown water and ash. A single whistle sliced the air, sharp, final. 300 Japanese women, mostly nurses and clerks, lined up in silence, heads lowered so deep their caps brushed their knees. A voice shouted in English, rough but steady, lower. They obeyed. Mud splashed across bare ankles. No one spoke. They'd been told the Allies would punish them for the Emperor's shame. What followed wasn't punishment. It was confusion. The guards didn't bark or strike. They just stood there, Australian soldiers, faces unreadable, rifles slung casually. When the order ended, the women stayed bent. No one dared rise first. Seconds passed, then a strange command broke through at ease. The interpreter hesitated. The women didn't understand. A guard stepped forward, gesturing with his hand, slow, open, palmed as if calming frightened animals. That small motion changed everything. A few lifted their eyes. One of them, a 22-year-old nurse named Junko Mori, saw her first Allied face, young, sunburned, eyes tired rather than cruel. He wasn't mocking, he wasn't gloating, he simply looked human. She'd grown up on military broadcasts painting these men as beasts. But this one looked like her brother before he went missing at Guadalcanal. Reports indicate nearly 400-500 Japanese women were captured across the Pacific, many expecting torture. Rebels' camp alone held about 300 female POW, or the largest group in the region. Most had been trained to take cyanide rather than surrender. Yet here they stood, trembling, waiting for blows that never came. The whistle blew again, back to quarters. The interpreter translated. No shouting, no humiliation. The guards turned their backs and walked away first. That gesture, letting the defeated move second, was an unthinkable reversal in their world of hierarchy. Some of the women began to weep quietly, not from fear, but from something far stranger, disorientation. Junko whispered, "Why didn't they hit us?" No one answered. The rain thickened. Steam rose from the ground, mingling with the smell of wet cloth and disinfectant. And as she straightened for the first time, Junko caught one guard glancing back, eyes soft, not hostile. That single, forbidden glance would start a chain reaction neither side could stop. The next morning, the same parade ground. Mist hung low over the camp, blurring the barbed wire into a silver haze. Boots crunched on gravel. The women stood again, heads lowered, but this time their breaths were steadier. Fear dulled into a strange, heavy curiosity. When the guard line halted, Junko risked it a fraction of an inch, just enough to lift her gaze, and that's when it happened. Their eyes met, hers swollen from sleeplessness. His blue-gray and wary both froze. For a second, the entire camp seemed to hold its breath. The Australian guard shifted, breaking the spell. He reached for something on his belt. Junko flinched, expecting the strike she'd been trained to brace for. Instead, he pulled out a metal canteen, unscrewed it, and without a word, extended it toward her. She hesitated. In Imperial training, accepting water from the enemy was a disgrace proof of defeat. Yet the thirst burned in her throat like acid. Slowly, she took it. The water was warm, metallic, but it tasted like reality. She looked up again, and the guard's expression softened, half pity, half confusion, as if he too couldn't understand why offering water felt like rebellion. Across the line, other guards watched. One smirked, another looked away, but no one stopped him. Later, Junko would write in her journal, "He handed me water, not orders." That sentence would appear decades later in war archives, cited by historians studying the psychology of surrender. Allied records show that less than 4% of POW under Allied control died in captivity, compared to over 27% under Japanese custody. The numbers alone shattered everything these women had believed. Their own empire, they realized, had treated captives far worse than their supposed barbarians. That night, whispers spread through the barracks. They don't hate us. They give medicine. They smile. Confusion curdled into something deeper, shame wrapped in gratitude. For the first time, Junko and the others felt the ground tilt beneath the moral map they'd lived by. When lights out came, Junko lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. The canteen still sat beside her cot, half full. She didn't drink the rest. She just watched it glint in the moonlight, proof that mercy could be stranger than fear. And by dawn, that mercy would spread beyond water. By the third day, the shock had settled into routine. Roll call, inspection, meal. But something invisible had shifted between captor and captive, a rhythm less like domination, more like uneasy coexistence. Junko noticed how the guards moved slower now, less mechanical. They no longer barked orders, they requested them. One medic, Corporal Lewis, walked down the line with a clipboard and a bandaged hand. He stopped when he saw her shivering in the morning mist. "Frostbite?" he asked softly. She didn't respond, didn't know how. He crouched, peeling back the corner of her soaked sock. To her horror, he grimaced not with disgust, but concern. Then, right there on the gravel, he pulled a small tin of ointment from his kit and began treating her foot. She wanted to protest. Officers don't bow, enemies don't kneel, but he did. The whispers started that night. "Why are they kind?" One woman murmured. "They're the enemy," another hissed. Yet even as they repeated it, no one sounded convinced. The camp's medical tent became a symbol of cognitive dissonance. Beds lined with Japanese POW, tended by Allied medics. Some women cried from pain, others from humiliation. But one nurse, Takahashi, whispered to Junko, "Maybe this is what mercy feels like when you don't deserve it." Records from the Rabor camp show that over 8 tons of medical supplies were used monthly, nearly the same amount allocated to Allied soldiers themselves. The Red Cross reported that POW care in Pacific camps consumed enough resources to treat 1-200 civilian patients per month. The irony was cruel. Women once trained to deny care to the wounded now received it freely from their enemy. Junko couldn't escape the weight of it. Each dressing change, each dose of disinfectant, tore open a deeper wound, the memory of her own patients, Allied prisoners she'd been ordered to ignore. She started asking herself questions that had no answers. That night, when the guard brought their meal, watery rice and canned meat, she stared at it for a long time before eating. Her hands trembled, not from hunger but guilt, because now, for the first time, kindness felt heavier than punishment. And by the following dusk, that guilt would find its voice in a confession that no one expected. Night fell like a curtain of damp velvet over the Rabor camp. Inside the barracks, the air smelled of mildew, sweat, and quiet regret. A small circle of women sat around a metal barrel glowing with weak firelight. The flames twisted shadows across their faces, faces that had once worn crisp nurse uniforms, now hollowed by shame. Junko listened as one of them, Sergeant Eiko Soto, finally spoke. "I was in a field hospital near Manila." She began, voice shaking. "We had Allied captives. They begged for water. Our officer said, 'They are no longer human.'" Her lips trembled. "We obeyed. We let them die. The crackle of fire swallowed the rest. No one interrupted. Another voice followed, Takahashi, the medic who'd whispered about mercy days earlier. We thought cruelty was duty. Now kindness feels like betrayal." Around the circle, some women cried openly. Others stared blankly, lost somewhere between denial and awakening. According to post-war interrogations, about 30% of captured Japanese nurses admitted to witnessing or assisting in war crimes, often under extreme duress. The numbers are buried deep in archives, but the emotional math inside this barrack was simple. Obedience had cost them their humanity. Junko pressed her palms together, trying to steady her breathing. In the Empire's moral code, guilt was weakness, confession, disgrace. Yet here, inside a foreign cage, guilt was the only proof that something human still remained. Eiko whispered, "Do you think they know what we did?" Junko replied quietly, "Maybe that's why they're kind." No one slept that night. The rain drummed softly on the tin roof as memories replayed like punishment. The same hands that once tightened bandages had also tightened ropes. Each heartbeat felt like an apology. At dawn, the barrel's embers had cooled to ash. The women rose without speaking. Their eyes were red but clearer, as if sorrow had washed away propaganda more effectively than any Allied lecture ever could. And when breakfast came, a bowl of thin rice, Junko made a choice. She would not eat, not until she had done something, anything, to balance the weight. That evening she saw her chance. The rain had eased by evening, leaving the camp drenched and steaming. Dinner came in dented metal bowls, rice thin as soup, a spoonful of tinned meat floating on top. The guards moved down the line in silence, checking each prisoner's ration. Junko clutched her bowl, staring at it. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but the guilt from last night clawed deeper. Across the fence, a wounded Australian guard sat propped against a post, his bandage stained dark. He was one of the men who'd handed her water days ago. Now his hand trembled as he tried to eat his own ration. No one helped him. Rules forbade crossing the perimeter. Junko hesitated, glancing toward the other women. No one met her eyes. The fire from their confessions still lingered, but no one dared act on it. She made her decision in silence. When the sentry turned away, she slipped from the line, carrying her bowl like contraband. Her bare feet splashed through puddles until she reached the fence. The guard looked up, startled. Junko knelt, pushed the bowl through a gap in the wire. He froze, then impossibly he smiled. No, he whispered, keep it. She shook her head, voice barely a breath. Please. For a moment, the only sound was rain tapping against tin. Then he did something that stopped her heart. He bowed. A small, quick dip of the head. Respect, gratitude, equality. Reports indicate the average POW ration in Allied camps was about 1,800 calories per day, while a frontline Allied soldier consumed around 3,200. The imbalance was massive, yet here, one prisoner had given up the little she had to feed her captor. That single exchange rippled through the camp. Word spread within hours. The Japanese woman gave food to an Aussie. Some guards laughed. Others grew quiet. For the prisoners it was unthinkable, a reversal of the war's moral script, a gesture that said, we are no longer enemies trapped by flags. That night Junko sat empty, stomached but strangely calm. The fence no longer felt like a wall, it felt like a mirror. Both sides were starving for the same thing, dignity, and the next morning that mirror cracked wide open. The story of the rice bowl spread like wildfire through Rabaul. Within days, both guards and captives began testing the invisible border that separated them. First came small exchanges. A cigarette slipped through the fence, a folded scrap of paper with a clumsy sketch. Then a harmonica. One afternoon a sound floated across the yard, thin at first, then fuller. A tune Junko didn't recognize, but its rhythm felt like heartbeat. The guards paused, curious. The women inside the barracks listened in silence until one of them began humming softly. Within minutes, another joined, then another. Soon English and Japanese voices wove into a single thread. Home, sweet home. The moment was fragile, dangerous. They knew it broke every rule of war, yet nobody stopped. The guards leaned against their rifles, heads bowed in thought as their supposed enemies sang about family, loss, and longing. In that moment, no one was victor or captive, just survivors sharing a melody. Later testimonies describe how music became a secret language inside POW camps. Reports show over 70% of post-1945 prisoner memoirs mention songs or improvised instruments as emotional lifelines. For Rabaul, this was more than distraction, it was rebellion through harmony. Junko wrote in her diary, the sound was softer than forgiveness, but it was the same shape. When she looked up, she saw Corporal Lewis, the medic who'd once knelt to treat her, standing beyond the fence, eyes closed, mouthing the words with them. That evening, the guards didn't sound the curfew whistle. They just let the song end naturally, fading with the sea breeze. It was the first night in weeks the camp felt human. Even the mosquitoes seemed to hum along, but harmony has a way of drawing unwanted attention. 2 days later, rumors reached headquarters. Fraternization, sympathy, breach of protocol. Orders were being drafted fast. The same music that had stitched hearts together now threatened to unravel discipline. As the women lay in their bunks that night, unaware of what was coming, Junko whispered, "Maybe they'll understand." By morning, new footsteps echoed in the compound, crisp, official, unkind. Morning broke with military precision. No song, no smiles, just the heavy rhythm of boots on wet gravel. A jeep rolled into the compound, its tires hissing through puddles. An officer in a pressed uniform stepped out, papers in hand, eyes cold as the steel buttons on his chest. The message came straight from headquarters: end all unnecessary contact, maintain discipline, no fraternization. The guards froze. The air thickened. Junko could tell from their faces that something had shifted back. Something fragile had just been crushed under the weight of war protocol. Corporal Lewis read the order twice, lips tight. Then he turned toward the barracks, where the diary pages, notes, sketches, fragments of music, lay hidden under a wooden crate. That evening, when the women were ordered to stay inside, smoke began curling from a small fire pit behind the medic tent. Lewis crouched beside it, feeding pages into the flames. He didn't look away. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished, their shared story erased by command. A young private asked him quietly, "Sir, why burn it?" Lewis replied without emotion, "Orders are orders." Then, almost to himself, even kindness has rules. According to Allied records, at least 12 personnel were caught, marshaled in 1946 for excessive empathy toward prisoners. In war's accounting, compassion could be as dangerous as sabotage. The system couldn't risk empathy spreading through ranks. Its softened edges meant to stay sharp. That night, Junko saw the smoke drift across the fence, the smell of burnt paper mixed with the sea air. She didn't know exactly what had been destroyed, but she felt its absence, a silence that tasted like ash. The guards' faces the next day were different, eyes averted, hands stricter. Still, Lewis couldn't unsee what he'd seen: the bow, the song, the shared humanity. When his superior ordered no communication, he nodded. But later, he did something quietly defiant. He began to write again. Not for the record, for remembrance. Under a floorboard in his quarters, a notebook took shape, small, leather, bound, filled with drawings of the women who bowed. And that secret diary would one day outlive them all. The notebook was no bigger than a soldier's hand, brown leather cover, edges worn, corners dark with sweat. Corporal Lewis hid it beneath a loose floorboard under his cot, away from prying eyes and inspections. Every night after roll call, when the camp settled into uneasy silence, he'd lift the board and write by candle stub. He recorded everything: the rain that turned to mist at dawn, the smell of disinfectant drifting from the infirmary, the way Junko bowed slightly before speaking. He sketched faces not perfect, but human, and scribbled notes like they bow lower when afraid, but look up quicker now. Sometimes he pressed a wildflower between the pages. Other nights, just a single line: "We are all pretending to be enemies. It wasn't supposed to exist." If caught, it would mean insubordination, but something in him refused to let the moment die. He'd watched brutality, seen men break under orders. This camp was different, an island of paradox where mercy survived the war's mathematics. Years later, archivists would confirm the diary's authenticity. Recovered in 1973, when the Rabaul site was excavated for redevelopment. Today, it rests in the Australian War Memorial Archives, each page stained by humidity and time. Among the entries is one that historians still debate, a drawing of Junko standing in rain, head bowed, captioned only with 3 words: "They bowed lower." Junko never knew it existed, but its pages became her ghost biography, preserving a version of her that history almost erased, the girl who disobeyed fear. Allied analysts who later studied the document called it an anomaly of empathy. But to Lewis, it was a confession. He wasn't documenting prisoners, he was documenting redemption. One entry reads, "If we burn memory, war wins twice." That line would resurface decades later in a museum exhibit, etched into glass without attribution. By the time Lewis was transferred in early 1946, the diary was full. He nailed the floorboard shut, whispering, "Stay hidden." Then he walked out of Rabaul for the last time. And while he forgot to sign his name on the final page, history would soon sign it for him, through the woman he'd drawn most often. August 1946, the same island that had once echoed with orders now buzzed with the sound of engines. Repatriation Day, the war was over, but no one looked victorious. The Japanese women stood in a line by the dock, dressed in mismatched uniforms, holding small bundles of belongings, photographs, letters, fragments of old identity. The Allied guards stood nearby, silent, their rifles slung low, their expressions unreadable. Junko's hands trembled as she clutched her tag number, 47. One by one, the women were called forward to board a white transport ship marked with a faded red cross. No one cheered, no one waved. The ocean air carried salt and memory in equal measure. When Junko reached the gangway, she turned once, looking back at the camp that had broken and rebuilt her. The guard she recognized, Corporal Lewis, was gone. Another soldier stood there, nodding politely. She bowed, not low this time, but steady, deliberate. The man returned it. That single bow, so quiet and human, felt like closure. As the ship pulled away, the women gathered on deck, watching Rabaul shrink into mist. None spoke. The empire that had demanded their obedience no longer existed. Tokyo lay in ruins, its streets still filled with hunger and silence. Back home, the reception was colder than the Pacific wind. Reports indicate that only 62 of the 300 Japanese female POW from Rabaul ever spoke publicly after repatriation. Most were treated with suspicion, accused of dishonor for surviving captivity. Their own families often refused to ask what had happened. "You are lucky to live," one mother told her daughter, "don't bring shame with words." Junko learned quickly that memory was dangerous. When she mentioned the guards' kindness, neighbors whispered, "Enemy propaganda." They said, the truth had no safe place to live. At night, she'd dream of the diary she never knew existed, the one buried under floorboards far away. The smell of wet wood, the faint sound of harmonica, the guard's quiet bow. She kept her silence for 40 years, until one day an unexpected letter arrived from Australia, stamped with a name she hadn't heard since the war. Lewis, Osaka, 1987. A classroom, not a courtroom, rows of students with tape recorders and notebooks, waiting for a guest they barely knew. Junko Mori, 70, frail but sharp, pied, stood at the front, her hands trembling not from age but memory. For 4 decades, she had buried her story beneath silence and obedience. But the letter from Australia had broken that dam. It was short, handwritten, "Found something that belongs to you." Inside the envelope was a photocopy, 1 page from the hidden diary. The sketch showed a young woman in rain, bowing low beneath it. They bowed lower. The signature at the bottom simply read, "C. Lewis." That image had dragged her back through time to mud, barbed wire, and mercy. Now, standing before the class, she unfolded the same page and placed it on the desk. "This," she said softly, "was drawn by my enemy." The room fell still, then she began to speak. Not of battles, but of the small revolutions that happened behind the wire. The canteen of water, the rice bowl, the song. She described how the bow that began in shame ended in mutual respect. Every word cracked the air like a confession years overdue. When her testimony aired on NHK later that month, over 2 million viewers tuned in. Letters flooded the network from both sides of the Pacific, some thanking her, others calling her traitor. But Junko didn't flinch. She read one letter aloud on camera. "We were told you were monsters. You gave us back our humanity." In one of her last interviews, she said, "They told us to bow lower, but every time we bowed, we learned to lift our heads a little higher." That line became the headline across Japan. Students quoted it in essays, veterans wrote it in memorial books. Her voice, once forbidden, had crossed oceans the way ships and orders once did, but now carrying something else, empathy. And as her story spread, one group of visitors decided to take it further, to meet on the very soil where it all began. Canberra, present day, the air is crisp, eucalyptus leaves shimmering in pale sunlight. At the Australian War Memorial, a crowd gathers before a glass display case. Inside, under careful lighting, rests a small brown notebook, the same one Corporal Lewis hid under a floorboard 80 years ago. The caption reads, "Diary of Rebel POW Camp, 1945-46. A group of Japanese visitors stands nearby. Among them is a woman in her 20s, Junko's granddaughter. She leans close, tracing the faded sketches with her eyes. Behind her, an elderly Australian veteran adjusts his medals, his hands trembling. Their eyes meet through the glass. Neither speaks, they simply bow, not low, not submissive, just mutual. Around them, cameras click softly, but no one interrupts. It isn't ceremony anymore, it's instinct. A gesture carried across generations, stripped of fear, reborn as respect. Every year, thousands come here for the reconciliation program. Students, families, veterans. Reports say over 40,000 youth participate annually in exchanges between Japan and Australia, learning the stories once buried under silence. Some read Junko's quote etched into the memorial wall. The bow was never surrender, it was recognition. For decades, both nations carried the scars of that war, the hunger, the propaganda, the guilt. Yet here, on this clean floor beneath high glass ceilings, it feels like the ghosts have finally stopped shouting. The past is still present, but no longer in charge. The veteran steps closer to Junko's granddaughter and points at the drawing of a woman bowing in rain. That, he says softly, is how peace began. She nods, tears catching the light. Outside, schoolchildren walk through the courtyard, mimicking the bow playfully, unaware of its weight. And maybe that's the truest victory, when memory becomes habit, not burden. As the crowd drifts away, the diary remains under glass, pages still open to that same sketch. A woman in rain, bowing lower, yet standing taller inside. The war ended long ago, but the gesture outlived it, proof that even in humanity's darkest chapters, respect can rewrite the ending.